or what was left of it. The intergalactic spiders were quickly overtaking what was left of the planet Emigala, their masses trenching through the vast wasteland and towards Vanderthos and his men. The gargantuan creatures lurched forward on spindly legs with giant heads and salivating mandibles. Vanderthos raised his ray gun and shot with fervor at the decrepit beasts. With great carnage he and his men marched forward, decimating the unearthly creatures and saving the planet, or what was left of it. Vanderthos emitted an intense vibrational frequency from his awakened and powerful seventh chakra, gyrating the spiders' ganglia and causing them to dance wildly in a confused frenzy before he or one of his men shot them in the head or heart. They conquered over 67,000 insectoid beasts, their mighty leader paving the way forward into the future of divine rule by Vanderthos and his herd of lesser beings. Vanderthos and his troops seized their ultimate power, conquered the enemy, and saved Emigala. Due to his exceptional marksmanship and mastery of interspecies telepathy through his years of mind expansion techniques, Vanderthos became a sort of god to the beings left on the planet. He was exalted as a divine inspiration to many, and his special powers and unique gifts were revered by the citizens of Emigala. He reigned as supreme holy chancellor of Emigala for many years, using his heightened vibrational resonance to raise the consciousness of the unawakened and send higher order manifestations straight into the pineal glands of any entity within a radius of 100 yards. It was said that he set many minds and souls free with his glorious powers. Hi there, welcome back to the 5th episode of Don't Drink the Flavor Aid. I'm your host Lexi, and today I'm going to revisit Jeff's megalomaniac personality from a fresh perspective. I'm also going to be discussing the eerie similarities between Jeff and Keith Raniere, the leader of the infamous NXIVM cult. Keith was recently sentenced to effectively life behind bars in 2021 after multiple counts of various crimes, including sexual abuse, were reported and verified. Okay, so before we dig back into Jeff, I'm going to take us on a little detour to introduce a new concept. So those of you who are deep into personality psychology are probably aware of the 5-factor model. But for those of you who aren't, please stick with me. Even if you're not a total psych nerd, this information could be valuable to understanding the quirks and personalities of you, of the people you're around, any human that you interact with. All right, so the 5-factor model can be broken down into the acronym OCEAN, OCEAN. And each of these personality traits lies on a spectrum. So, for example, the openness to experience, somebody can either be very low in openness to experience or very high in openness to experience, or anywhere in between that range. So typically, if you were to Google 5-factor model or OCEAN personality test right now and were to find that information and take a test, it's going to kind of give you a percentage of where you lie on that spectrum. So for example, when I take 5-factor personality model tests online, I typically score very high on openness to experience, somewhere from 80 to 90%. So openness to experience, these individuals are more likely to express unconventional beliefs because of their openness to new ideas. These individuals are prone to daydreaming, fantasizing. They tend to be very creative, very inventive, very artistic. They enjoy debate, philosophy, aesthetics, are very moved by beauty and, again, art, music. And people high in openness to experience are more likely to embrace things like counterculture. So, taking this in mind, you can imagine that in order to essentially create your own religion, you have to be pretty high in openness to experience. So, cult leaders like Jeff and Keith Raniere score high in openness to experience. They both hold undoubtedly extreme unconventional beliefs, and they both self report to be very inspired by lofty ideals. Again, really seeking um, beauty, truth, divinity, purity. Again, really abstract concepts are things that people high in openness to experience tend to really be fixated with. And what I would say too is openness to experience also makes one to be prone to be more curious and investigative. So that's what makes me believe that people with this malignant kind of narcissism, these psychopathic traits, really enjoy mind games because to them it's satisfying that need for novelty and intellectual curiosity. And especially combined with other personality traits, we'll see how these mind games really seem to unfold for the megalomaniac. So, next we have conscientiousness. And conscientiousness can be broken down into two subcategories. We have achievement, which is working hard, being very industrious, persistence, goal directed behavior. And we also have dependability, which is obedience, conformity, and associated with the desire to please. So you can see where this is a little bit tricky because with people like Jeff and Keith Raniere, you can see clear goal directed behavior. However, there's no obedience, there's no conformity, and there's absolutely no desire to please others. So that's where what I would suggest is that Jeff would probably score somewhere between mid to low range in conscientiousness because of these things that we just talked about. Okay, extroversion. So we're all familiar with the introvert extrovert dichotomy. Being high in extroversion um, means that someone is going to be apt to be more energetic, more assertive, and more gregarious. And of course, somebody low in extroversion is going to be less energized, less assertive, and less gregarious. So obviously, we see Jeff is very energetic, very assertive, and very gregarious. He's highly extroverted, and I would say that's probably a prerequisite to being, how do I put this, an effective cult leader, because it just seems to me that there's a lot of engagement constantly with the cult members. And there just seems to be a lot of enmeshment as well. And enmeshment is where boundaries in relationships are very murky. So that boundary line between you and I becomes almost non existent. And that's really what happens in a cult, right? It becomes almost homogenous because it's groupthink. Jeff is only going to attract those who are willing to mirror him. And so everybody, it's the cult of Jeff, right? The cult of personality. So I really feel that his high extroversion plays a role in the maintenance and development of the cult. And when I was looking more into NXIVM, I was very disturbed to see a lot of the kissing that went on between Keith and the female members. And I was just very struck by the lack of personal boundaries and the comfort that these women seem to have with Keith. And again, I think that's part of the charm. That's part of this extroversion, right? But also that extroverted element means a little bit more comfort socially. And again, I really think that's part of the allure of some of the megalomaniac cult leaders is, again, that cult of personality really has to be front and center. And extroverts tend to master that a little bit more than somebody who's lower on the extroverted spectrum. It's not, of course, that they can't be a charismatic cult leader if they really tried, but it's not going to come as innately or intuitively as someone who's high in extroversion as well as high or low in other traits that combine for that The lovely mixture of personality traits that get us somebody like Jeff. So then we have A, agreeableness. Agreeable people prefer low conflict. They're very good at cooperating. People moderately high on agreeableness are generally more willing to compromise than people low on agreeability. And people low in agreeableness tend to be very antagonistic. So, narcissism, antisocial personality disorder, these people are incredibly low in agreeableness. So they really thrive with conflict. They don't do well cooperating with others, and they do not compromise. So you can imagine low agreeableness mixed with high extroversion means somebody's apt to be incredibly social, but they're not apt to be pro-social. So what that means is they thrive being in a group setting, they thrive being a leader, at least from their eyes, but they also are unrelenting, unwilling to compromise, and people low in agreeability tend towards lower empathy. So that's also a very toxic combination, a very dangerous combination potentially. So finally, we have neuroticism. And this trait is characterized by emotional instability. So individuals high in neuroticism tend towards negative mood states, and this may include depression, anxiety. Individuals high in neuroticism are prone to frequent worry and low mood. So I would say that Jeff scores probably lower on neuroticism. We do see some of that irritability come out, but that's mostly due to his low agreeability. Although what I will say is it does seem to be a trend with cult leaders that neuroticism traits seem to start off low, but do tend to increase as the pressure's put on, as they tend to get more paranoid. Their delusions tend to grow more dangerous, and their actions grow even more sinister, as we've seen with Keith Raniere and NXIVM. And hopefully we will not see happen with TFU. Okay, so going back to openness to experience, these individuals again really enjoy a rich fantasy life, and oftentimes you can find them enjoying a good fiction novel, maybe even a science fiction novel. So, again, this eerie similarity between Keith Raniere and Jeff Ayan is they both really became enamored with particular science fiction novels in their youth. Keith Raniere was inspired by Isaac Asimov's book Second Foundation, written in 1953. And this included a character that had extrasensory perception, including telepathy. Allegedly, there were mind control powers involved. But this led me down a rabbit hole, which then led to a postponement of releasing this episode. Keith Raniere, somebody please help me on the pronunciation there. Keith Raniere patented something called rational inquiry, which later evolved into NXIVM. So this was kind of his complicated matrix-like version of the mirror exercise. And it's clear he put quite a bit of consideration to this. You can find the patent online for his rational inquiry method. And all of this really stemmed from Asimov's novel, allegedly, including the following quotes that I did pull from, I believe it was in the deposition from Keith Raniere. He said, when he read the book, it inspired, quote, how to optimize how the mind handles data, and he became fascinated with how human behavior drives motivation. So he was very interested in psychology, but he didn't have really the depth of background, and clearly he did not have the empathy to be able to conduct be the CEO and the chief leader, along with Nancy Salzman, of this entire complex experiment he was running, social experiment, that became completely upside down from anything that this patent suggests, right? So, and in his deposition as well, he talks a lot about ethical decision making, and how do we motivate people to make ethical decisions? How do we calculate who's going to be ethical and who's not going to be ethical, right? A lot of game theory, prisoner's dilemma type stuff. So even with his background in mathematics and a little bit of background in science, although he seemed to upplay that, he was just extremely optimistic and fantasy driven, which again may come back to some of his personality attributes, including that low agreeableness. So anytime somebody suggests, well, wait a minute, or pricks a hole in this bubble of his fantasy, Keith doesn't like that. And he's going to let you know he doesn't like that. And again, we see this play out with Jeff as well. If you are willing to mirror his goal, his ambition, his dream, if you're willing to become a little bit like Jeff and reflect that back to him constantly in order to maintain be a part of the group, and the cult leader collects enough of them, well, guess what? You've got a cult. So I kind of picture it this way. It's no, you guys don't get it. This isn't an MLM scheme. This is really based on science. This is based on math. This is based that we are going to entirely revolutionize what it means to be heightened human beings, or some nonsense like that. And here's something I really want to come back to and stress is you can read Keith's patent, you can read the deposition, and it all sounds really good. However, when you look at Keith himself, he does not have the background to be conducting a social experiment. He does not have the credentials. He did not go through the proper review boards in order to conduct an experiment like this. And this is the danger of self-empowerment groups, anything that doesn't have strict regulation. And I'm not saying these things aren't beneficial. Absolutely they are. And we see that even with some former NXIVM members, some former TFU members. Remember that these cults start off where people say, in the beginning, my self-esteem did improve. And then it got weird and I left. We hear this time and time again. And this is the power of, again, that cult of personality, the extroversion, we're here to raise your self-esteem. And if everybody in the room is saying, I'm here to raise my self-esteem, and I will do what it takes to do that. I will listen to other people, I will mirror them, and they'll do the same for me. Okay, you've got some basic underpinnings of some decent group therapy, but again, there's no group therapists in the room. Not with NXIVM, not with TFU. And that's something I see with Keith Raniere and Jeff Ayan as well, is they really boast about having world-renowned, international researchers, PhDs, right? They throw out all these glitzy terms that really razzle-dazzle and blind people to the truth, which is these people don't have the proper credentials. They don't have the clinical experience to be dealing with things like human tragedy and the deep dark secrets that people hold within them that they're hoping to heal. And again, through trial and error, through just living life, we're going to bump into our traumas, and sometimes spontaneously those traumas will heal. Because again, the brain, the mind is a living organ. It's always processing data and information. That's why we experience things like flashbacks for those people out there who experience post-traumatic stress disorder. But at the end of the day, with or without major psychiatric disorders, people are walking in blindly to a situation, not understanding the repercussions of allowing two very self-centered, very deluded people to be in charge of their psychic content, their soul content. And I guess just to get a little bit off topic before we move on to Jeff, the origin of the term psyche, which we associate with the mind, actually means soul in Greek. So when you're letting somebody into your mind, you're letting them into the contents of your soul, as far as I'm concerned. And that's, again, a big part of why I'm doing this. Because if we are going to allow somebody inside an incredibly fundamental part of our essence of who we are as a person, something that controls our emotions, our motivation, and allows us to properly interact with the world, distorted belief systems, again, the power of belief is so powerful. And if we are going to allow people to help us get into our untapped potential, tap into that tiger within, raise our self esteem, work through our traumas, that person has to have the best interest of your soul in mind. And so you better be pretty damn sure that the person who's helping you with your soul journey has a soul themselves. But when we want to ask ourselves what makes someone vulnerable to entrusting their soul with somebody like Jeff or Keith, I think that there's certain personality attributes we also have to keep in mind. And I haven't really looked into this in
The
depth, and I
Brotherhood
think I'm
wanted
going to
so
come back to
desperately
it
to
maybe in
overthrow
another
and
episode.
overcome these new
But I will
XGENEs
say
that
that
Chanel,
for
along with
me,
some of her
I
most
feel as
dearest
though
comrades
being
in arms
erratic
such as
and being
nature,
fairly
beauty,
introverted
truth,
put me at an
divinity,
advantage
construct,
for
Scott Summers,
avoiding
Mighty Max,
toxic group
Blackbird the
situations like this.
XJET among others suppressed the very
Because of
deadly
my
radio waves that
introversion
were being
and being more prone to
concentrated and
these negative
focused from many
emotions,
military
I
satellites,
tend to really
satellite, and
notice
other forms of
when I
smaller,
start to
more
feel
handheld
anxious
devices
or
abused and used these
guilty or
technologies to
uncertain when
try
I'm
to
around certain
undercut their new
people.
threat.
And
But as these new
I try to
heroes stepped
examine
into
that
their new
information as
skin, it
data.
seemed more and
Why
more
am I
that
feeling
nothing
this
could
way?
stop
Is
them.
this about
Even though
something from my
Christopher Robin had
past?
been
Does
playing
this
all the
person
girls on
remind me
his
of
team,
somebody
they had to stand by him
I
and work
have,
together, of which they
maybe have
struggled with in the
experience
beginning,
with what's
soon
going
learned
on
to be
here?
agreeable as under
And those are
nature's. Lin
questions we
Lu,
all need to be
strict
asking
demanding
ourselves.
person,
I'm
they knew
getting
she could use
emotional
her
data
mind
in my
control
body, right? I'm
abilities as
picking
the
up on
vibration
something
of her horns
that's
caused
telling
the
me
high frequencies
something's
that
not
would
right
make her
here.
own teammates
And
follow
we
suit.
really owe it
Although
to
over
ourselves
time she
to check
leaned on
in with
this
those
lesson
feelings.
this day would
And
show just
again,
how much they had
me
coped
being prone to
together as a team.
neuroticism,
Serena was
I'm more
jealous
prone to
and
having
wanted
that
her sister
this doesn't
dead.
feel right, this
She
doesn't
didn't
feel
back
right
off,
type
and no
feeling.
matter what they did to
And
try to
even
put
though
their own
bumping into
under it,
that
seemed nothing could
more often
work.
than I
Not
like
even
causes
the cyanide
issues,
capsules
and
could make
sometimes
this
there's
new immortal
misfiring,
go under the
which
table.
again goes to some
Telepathy,
distorted
mind
belief
control,
patterns that we
invincible
develop.
love,
It also
invulnerability,
puts me at an advantage and
psychokinetic
has
energy
really kept me
manipulation,
safe
fireballs,
from predators
teleportation,
like Jeff and
decimation,
Keith, and
depth,
I thank goodness
empathy.
for
She
that.
had become almost
So it's
Jesus-like.
not
But
entirely
her
bad
anger
to
and
be
rage
a
from her own
neurotic,
fellow
outgoing
team members
introvert
and family and
who
friends using
has
their
discretion
resources
about
against her
who
made her
remains in my life and who
personality turn more
doesn't.
dark, and
And that's
before it was
something,
too
again,
late, instead of a messiah they
we all
had
need
a
to be
devil
paying
in their
attention
hands.
to.
The choice
How
was
do we
up to
feel in
them.
our
But
relationships
Chanel
with
would
other
have to
people? Are
go back
there
in time to
negative
cause the stress
emotions
of how
there?
her
And
fellow
if
team members
so,
conducted
what are those
themselves
negative
before
emotions
nature
about?
turned dark, but they
And
didn't
again, this
care
is the
no
self
matter what she
inquiry
tried to do to
that's
warn
part
them how things
of
would go.
a lot of
And in
these
the end she
cults.
was the
And
only
this is
one left
something that
standing, acting,
something
dropping a
has
spirit bomb
done
like
with
Kai Blast
more
onto her own
accuracy, more
team members. The stress
safety,
they put on her razzle-dazzle the ships
more
that could
rigorous
elude sonar equipment. She
evidence-based,
was like that,
science-based
but
research
reverse.
behind it
She could
in
hone in on
psychotherapeutic
exactly where they were,
settings.
and the psychic
So
attack
before I
began in
hop
5,
back off this
4,
soapbox, I'll
3,
just remind
2,
people,
1. I warned
let's
you
leave
to stop,
psychotherapy to the
said nature to her
professionals and
sister, but
not
they
to
didn't,
the
because they
overgrown
didn't care about
man
anyone but
children
themselves.
that
No
never
matter how
escaped
much
their
pain they
surgery or
inflicted, they would
fantasies.
soon see nature's true power.
And with that, we will come to Jeff's favorite book